dead of night. You're completely alone in a historic bed and breakfast. But right above you, up in the pitch black of an empty, locked attic, heavy boots are walking. Just back and forth, pacing endlessly across the floorboards directly over your bed.
Whatever is up there came to the top of the staircase. I could hear it breathing. That's exactly what Mitchell Green whispered after spending the night sitting paralyzed in a chair, staring at his locked door. He hadn't slept a single wink, because waiting just on the other side of the wood was the distinct, raspy sound of heavy, exhausted breathing. So, what do you do when the footsteps above you finally stop, and the door to your room slowly begins to open? Think about that for a second. What do you do when the quiet isolation you paid for turns out to be a trap, and you suddenly realize you are not alone in the dark?
Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Section 1. The Midnight Footsteps.
Back in the spring of 2016, Thomas and Beverly Hargrove really thought they'd struck gold. They had just restored this absolutely gorgeous antebellum mansion down in Savannah, Georgia. And at first, the reviews were phenomenal. But then, the warning signs started creeping in. A couple from North Carolina casually mentioned at checkout that they'd had, kind of a weird night. They heard someone walking up in the attic, just pacing heavily around 2 or 3 in the morning. Beverly, being a good host, apologized right away. She just figured her husband, Thomas, was up there doing some late-night organizing. But here's the deeply chilling part. Thomas was actually hours away in Atlanta visiting family. That attic, it was completely 100% empty.
Fast forward 2 weeks, and Mitchell Green checks in for a 5-night stay. By morning number 4, Beverly finds him at 6 a.m., bags already packed, and he is just utterly terrified. He told her about the pacing, he told her about that heavy breathing right at the top of the stairs. And look, Mitchell was a seasoned solo traveler of 15 years. So for him to be in a state of sheer absolute panic, that's just completely unnatural. He actually paid for his unused nights, looked Beverly dead in the eye, and said, "I am not spending another night under that attic." And he was gone from the property within the hour.
Section 2. The Bed and Breakfast. To really grasp the level of dread that infected this property, we need to talk about the setting. Savannah itself is just draped in Spanish moss and centuries of dark secrets. It's exactly the kind of place where the dead are said to linger. Now, the house at 218 Abercorn Street was built way back in 1849. It is a massive 3-story mansion with a full-length attic that runs directly above the second-floor guest rooms. Thomas, who was actually a retired contractor, had personally cleared out and reinforced that entire attic space. He knew every single inch of it. He installed this simple string of bare bulbs right down the middle, permanently locked the doors, and that was that. Guests were literally never allowed up there.
What's really interesting about this is how highly localized the terror actually was. The bed and breakfast had 12 different rooms, and honestly, everything else was perfectly peaceful, totally normal, except for this one specific room, Room 14. It was this large, beautifully decorated space on the second floor, with original pine floors and a classic clawfoot tub. But the haunting, the footsteps, that thick, oppressive dread, it was all focused entirely like a laser beam, straight down through the ceiling of Room 14.
Section 3. The Attic's Dark Secret.
Now, Thomas Hargrove was a man of concrete, steel, and logic, a 58-year-old contractor who absolutely does not believe in ghosts. He believes in, settling foundations and drafty windows. So, determined to find a perfectly rational explanation for all this nonsense, he grabbed his keys. He slowly climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, unlocked that heavy attic door, and pulled the cord. The thin yellow light of those bare bulbs flickered on. The shadows in the corners of this long, low-ceiling room were incredibly deep. He walked the entire length of the space, pressing his weight onto the floorboards, checking the latches on the dormer windows. Everything was completely solid. He was entirely alone up there. But right as he turned around to leave, his eyes caught something tucked away in the far north corner.
Tucked away right where the roof sloped down to meet the floorboards, there was a stain. It was roughly circular, about 3 feet across. But the truly unsettling part wasn't the size. It was how incredibly deep it went. The actual wood grain was completely disrupted. It was like something incredibly dark and thick had soaked deep, deep into the boards and just dried there over many, many decades. Thomas had no idea what it was, but looking at it sent an icy shiver right down his spine. He quickly locked the attic and went straight back downstairs.
And wouldn't you know it, that very night, the dreams began. Every single night, Thomas dreamt he was standing in the attic under that awful thin yellow light, and sitting right beside the stain, with his knees pulled tightly up to his chest, was a man. A silent man dressed in dark, century-old wool clothing and heavy boots. The man never moved an inch, but Thomas could feel the intense, suffocating weight of his awareness. After about 2 weeks of this silent psychological torture, Beverly finally broke down and confessed something horrifying. She was having the exact same nightmare. This silent man in the heavy boots had somehow invaded both of their minds.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds. A history of disappearances. Beverly wasn't the type to just sit back and be terrorized in her own home. She was a researcher at heart. So she drove straight down to the Chatham County Records Office to pull every single document she could possibly find on 218 Abercorn Street. The property had a really long, winding history. I mean, it survived the Civil War, sat completely abandoned for decades, and saw multiple different owners. But as Beverly scoured through the archives, her attention snagged on one very specific, dark era. You see, between 1901 and 1919, the mansion was actually operated as a boarding house by a woman named Clara Whitson. Digging through the boxes, Beverly actually found the old guest registry from 1911. It was mostly just routine entries, names, dates. That is, until she found one specific line that had been violently crossed out with dark ink. The paper was literally nearly torn through by the sheer force of the pen, almost like someone wanted to completely obliterate this person's very existence. Holding the page up to the light, she could just barely make out the name. Samuel Pratt. Arrived March 4th, 1911. When she dug even deeper into the local newspaper archives, she found this tiny 4-paragraph article from September 1911. Samuel Pratt, a traveling salesman, was reported missing from that exact boarding house. The police investigated, found no signs of foul play, and the case was just closed. When Beverly brought this dark history home, Thomas knew exactly what he had to do. Armed with a flashlight and a heavy iron pry bar, he marched back up to the attic on a bright Saturday afternoon. He knelt right beside the stain, and in the harsh, unforgiving beam of his flashlight, his 30 years of contracting experience gave him an answer he just couldn't deny. He knew wood. And he knew exactly what very old, deeply dried blood looked like when it soaked into raw pine floorboards. He sat there with his pry bar, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. But he just couldn't do it. He absolutely refused to lift those boards. He was entirely too terrified of what he knew was buried underneath.
Section 5. The Final Guest.
This brilliantly illustrates how desperate the couple was getting. Despite their growing horror, they actually kept room 14 open, desperately trying to write off the events as just a string of weird coincidences. Enter Patricia Holden in October 2016. She was a 67-year-old retired school teacher from Kentucky. Super warm, fiercely rational, and honestly just a no-nonsense woman who was only in town to research her genealogy. For the first 2 days, she had a lovely time enjoying the veranda and visiting the local archives. But on the third night, at exactly 4:22 a.m., the Hargroves were jolted violently awake by this desperate, frantic pounding on their apartment door. Beverly threw it open to find Patricia standing there, barefoot in her nightgown. Her face was completely drained of blood. She wasn't just spooked, she was in a state of profound clinical shock.
Once they got Patricia inside and she finally managed to wrap her trembling hands around a hot mug of tea, she delivered a genuinely chilling account. She told them she woke up at 3 a.m. to the unmistakable sound of heavy boots pacing directly above her bed, back and forth. But then, the footsteps stopped, dead center, right above her face. A moment later, she heard the loud creak of the attic door at the end of the hall slowly opening. Then, the footsteps moved slowly down the hallway, stopping right outside her own bedroom door.
She lay there absolutely frozen in the dark. And suddenly, a heavy, unnatural cold settled over the entire room. She said it wasn't a draft, it felt like the dense, suffocating weight of something standing immediately next to her bed. And then, she heard it. Slow, exhausted breathing right next to her ear, the raspy breathing of someone who had been waiting for a very, very long time. I mean, this 67-year-old woman ran out of that room faster than she had ever run in her entire life.
So, the crucial point is coming up here in Section 6, he never checked out.
That right there was the absolute breaking point. The Hargroves could no longer deny the terrifying reality of what was living above their ceiling. By November 2016, room 14 was permanently deadbolted shut. The Hargroves told all future guests that it was under renovation, and honestly, shortly after that, they sold the entire property and fled Savannah for good. Now, today, that very same building operates as a luxury boutique hotel. The room numbers have all been changed, the furniture has been completely swapped out, but if you scroll through the modern travel sites and filter through all that glowing 5-star praise, you will absolutely find a scattering of bewildered, terrified 1-star reviews. And they're always from guests staying in a very specific corner room on the second floor. They still complain about heavy footsteps pacing all night above them, and the terrifying sensation of something standing just outside their door.
Let that sink in for a moment. 1911.
Samuel Pratt, the traveling salesman from Macon, arrived at 218 Abercorn Street in 1911, and he never, ever left. His blood soaked deep into those pine floorboards, and his heavy boots continue to walk those attic floors well over a century later. Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? The next time you hear a random creak from the ceiling of a strange hotel room in the middle of the night, who exactly is pacing above you? If you enjoyed this explainer and you want us to uncover more horrifying truths, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel.
It is 3:17 a.m. Daniel Whitfield is absolutely tearing up his staircase. His heart is hammering in his chest because his 9-year-old daughter is screaming in pure terror, and the sound is just ripping through this dead silent house. He reaches the narrow door at the end of the second-floor hallway, throws his hand out to grab the simple brass latch, and immediately recoils in agony. The metal isn't just warm, it is literally burning hot. And standing right behind him, little Lily is just sobbing. She's trembling all over, and she whispers these chilling words. She's angry tonight. She's different. And right then, from the pitch-black attic on the exact opposite side of that blistering door, Daniel hears it. It's not footsteps. It's this horrific, slow, heavy thud. The unmistakable sound of something massive being dragged inch by inch across the bare wooden floorboards. So, what kind of dark secret was actually hidden at 47 Elm Hollow Road? Okay, let's dive into this. In this explainer, we're unpacking the intensely documented, terrifying, true story of a family's dream home that turned into an absolute waking nightmare. We're going to look strictly at the facts, the historical records, and the exact timeline of events that drove a completely rational family to abandon their home in the dead of winter. To truly understand the sheer panic of that night, we've got to look at how unbelievably fast this whole thing escalated. The Whitfield family, that's Daniel, a history teacher, his wife Karen, a graphic designer, and their 2 kids, they move into this seemingly perfect $289,000 Salem, Massachusetts dream home on November 3rd, 2019. It's a gorgeous 1887 colonial. But the honeymoon phase? It was practically non-existent. Just 16 days in, on November 19th, the midnight footsteps start. By December 4th, an imaginary friend shows up, and by December 20th, that's when the screaming begins. Now, right from day one, there was this unspoken rule in the house. Nobody goes up into the attic. When they were first touring the property, opening that narrow, painted-shut door let out this gust of cold, stale air. And I don't just mean a draft. I'm talking about a deep, still, unnatural cold, like something had just been up there waiting. Inside, sitting in the corner, was an empty wooden rocking chair, facing a single circular window. The realtor totally brushed it off, saying it had literally just always been there. Well, the illusion of a happy new home completely shattered on November 19th. At exactly 2 a.m., 12-year-old Marcus shows up in the kitchen doorway. He is pale white and completely shaken. His mom, Karen, was actually already awake because she was feeling this deliberate, slow movement vibrating from the ceiling right above her bedroom. Marcus whispers, "Mom, there's someone in the attic." So Daniel and Karen stand out in the hallway, holding their breath, and they hear it. The unmistakable, rhythmic creak, creak, creak of that rocking chair echoing from upstairs. But when Daniel goes up to check, the attic is completely empty, but that chair is still gently rocking.
As if that isn't terrifying enough, the horror wasn't just sounds. On December 4th, 9-year-old Lily, who's a pretty quiet kid with a vivid imagination, just casually drops that she has a new friend. When Karen asks her what her friend's name is, Lily hits her with this deeply unsettling response. She doesn't tell me her name, she just watches. Lily then completely calmly explains that a tall woman with incredibly long hair stands right by her bed at night, silently watching her sleep, before turning around and walking back up to that circular window in the attic. I mean, imagine hearing that from your kid. That same evening, absolutely paralyzed by dread, Daniel grabs a flashlight and searches every single inch of that freezing attic space. And hidden away behind a stack of old wooden crates in the far corner, he makes a highly disturbing discovery. He finds a stash of deeply personal items: a neatly folded woman's black dress, a pair of tiny, worn-out leather shoes, a cracked hand mirror, and a journal. The pages were yellowed and super brittle from age.
Section 1. The Journal of Esther Crane, A Dark History Revealed. This journal belonged to a woman named Esther Crane. It turns out she was locked away in this exact same attic back in 1923 by her cruel, incredibly controlling husband, Harold. Over time, he had systematically isolated her, eventually forbidding her from leaving the house altogether, essentially forcing her into this freezing attic just to hide from his violent rages. Her final journal entry is just utterly heartbreaking. It's dated October 31st, 1923, and it reads, "Harold has locked the attic door from the outside. I can hear him below. I am very cold. I watch the children on the street through my little window. If I cannot leave this place in life, I wonder if I will leave it at all. Perhaps I will simply stay. Perhaps this window will be my whole world, forever." And there wasn't a single entry after that date. As Karen closed that journal, her hands were literally shaking. The silence in their kitchen was absolutely deafening. She looked over at Daniel and whispered, "She's still here. She's still watching from that window." It hit them like a ton of bricks. The tragic spirit of Esther Crane, who had just longed for the life and the children she was so viciously denied, had never actually left that house. So the crucial point is, this is exactly where the story violently shifts from a tragic, sad haunting into something completely terrifying. We are snapping right back to the night of December 20th, the night everything finally broke. It's 3:17 a.m. when Lily lets out that sustained, blood-curdling scream that rips Daniel and Karen from their sleep, eventually leading Daniel to that inexplicably burning hot attic latch. They find little Lily pressed flat against the wall, staring up at the ceiling in pure horror, just sobbing that the woman is different tonight. And up above them, that rocking chair is definitely not gently creaking anymore. It's violently slamming, a furious rhythm that is literally shaking the ceiling plaster down onto them. And underneath that slamming, echoing right through the wooden beams, is that horrific, slow, dragging sound of something impossibly heavy being pulled across the floorboards. Which brings us right back to Daniel finally forcing that attic door open. Instantly, his heavy-duty flashlight just flickers and completely dies. He is swallowed up by total pitch-black darkness at the top of the stairs. But he doesn't need to see, because he can feel it. The air isn't just cold anymore. It is a thick, incredibly heavy presence. It's this vast, wrong weight in the air. And this primal, reality-shattering realization hits this logical, rational history teacher. He is standing in the dark, and he is absolutely entirely not alone. Completely terrified, he backs down the stairs, latches the door, and just sits awake in the hallway guarding his family until the sun comes up. Section 2. The Investigation. Salem Historical Society Records. The very next morning, desperate for literally any logical explanation for the nightmare they were living in, Daniel takes the journal straight to the Salem Historical Society. He brings in a researcher, Professor Gerald Ashworth, to take a look at it. But digging into the historical record didn't help. It only made the nightmare so much worse. And this brilliantly illustrates the real horror of the story. The archives confirm that Esther moved into the house in 1918, but in November 1923, Harold Crane reported her missing. He told the police she had just run away. The house was sold to new owners a year later, in 1924. But here is the absolute darkest secret of all. Esther Crane's body was never, ever found. Driven almost mad by this horrifying revelation, Daniel started frantically digging deeper into the Salem City records. He requested the full, comprehensive structural history of 47 Elm Hollow Road. He was desperately searching for one final puzzle piece regarding how that attic was actually built. And what he found tucked away in a dusty 1987 structural renovation report, it confirmed his absolute worst fears. The report detailed that during some renovations in the 80s, workers had actually uncovered a hidden, sealed section of the attic subfloor. It was this narrow, custom-built space concealed directly beneath the floorboards in the far corner, exactly where Daniel had found Esther's personal belongings, hidden behind those crates. But here's the truly horrifying part. The workers never opened it. It was completely resealed with explicit official notes on the permit reading, "Structural Do Not Disturb." As you can probably guess, the Whitfield family didn't stick around to find out what was inside that space. On January 6th, 2020, they packed what they could and fled the house. They left the journal sitting right on the kitchen table and that rocking chair exactly where it sat in the attic. By March 2020, the house was relisted on the market and somehow resold in just 6 days to new, completely unsuspecting owners who honestly haven't been heard from publicly since. And today, years later, that secret remains completely hidden. But the psychological toll on the Whitfield family? It's devastating, and it is permanent. Lily Whitfield is 14 years old now, and to this day, she absolutely refuses to speak a single word about the horror she witnessed in that house. But the trauma is deeply etched into her daily life. She is a teenager who still sleeps with her bedroom light blazing every single night, forever altered by the memory of the tall woman who watches from the dark. Which leaves all of us with one final, undeniable, and deeply disturbing question. What is still waiting right now beneath the floorboards at 47 Elm Hollow Road? Because when you look at the historical records, the journal, and the sheer terror that drove a family from their home, it all points to one absolutely horrifying conclusion. Esther Crane never actually left that attic. If this explainer chilled you to the bone and you want to see more deep dives into documented historical mysteries, do us a huge favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because honestly, you never truly know what history might be hiding right above your head. It's 2:51 a.m. Your phone vibrates in the pitch black of your bedroom. You groggily open your security app to check the hidden camera you just placed in your attic. The screen glows with a faint green night vision tint. And right there, crouching perfectly, unnaturally still in the far corner, directly above where your 7-year-old child is sleeping, is a shape. It's got these impossibly long limbs, a head that is just slightly too large, and it's not moving. It's listening to your child breathe. Now, what if I told you this isn't some hypothetical scary movie plot? This actually happened in Portland, Oregon. Seriously, what do you do when the brand new house you just bought, the safe haven you literally just moved your family into, already has someone or something living inside? And honestly, the worst part? What if it's been patiently waiting for you to arrive? Let's get right into this horrifying, fully documented overview of what happened to the Calloway family. That image on the camera feed at 2:51 in the morning? Yeah, it definitely wasn't an animal. And it wasn't some weird trick of the shadows either. It was a non-human entity pressed completely flat against the rafters. But what makes this case so uniquely terrifying isn't just what it was, but the sheer scale of time and patience involved. To even begin to understand how the Calloways ended up in this literal nightmare, we gotta look at how it all started. Let's trace how a totally normal family move descended into absolute terror. The slide down into this nightmare was just a slow, agonizingly methodical escalation of dread. It all kicked off in September 2021. James, who works as a software engineer, and Nora, a pediatric nurse, moved into this classic 1920s craftsman bungalow on Birchwood Lane. It was a very typical Portland setting, gray skies, early sunsets, and a house featuring this incredibly cramped, plywood-floored attic that you could only reach by a pull-down ladder in the hallway. James popped up there once, decided it was pretty much useless for anything except storage, and just closed it up. But their 7-year-old son, Elliot, well, he noticed something right away. On literally their very first day in the house, right in the middle of all the crazy moving boxes, little Elliot stands right beneath that hallway attic hatch. He looks straight up, and with that weird, absolute certainty that only kids seem to have, he turns to his mom and says, "Someone's up there." You see, kids just process their environments differently than we do. We look around and see square footage and layout. They actually feel the weight of a room. Naturally, Nora just brushed it off as an overactive imagination. But fast forward 3 weeks, and Elliot casually drops a detail at dinner that changes everything. Right over a bowl of pasta, Elliot just says, "My friend from upstairs came to visit me last night." Just like that. He goes on to describe this figure standing in his doorway. And then he notes, with this terrifying innocence, his arms are kinda long. He mentioned the figure never actually spoke, never stepped inside the room, it just watched. The most unsettling part of this is Elliot wasn't even scared. To him, this long-armed watcher wasn't a monster hiding in the dark. It was just a lonely neighbor from the attic. That one specific phrase, "his arms are kinda long," absolutely lodged itself right in James's brain. So later that night, James grabs a heavy-duty flashlight and climbs up into the attic. He methodically searches every single inch of that dusty plywood space. And what does he find? Old holiday decorations, a busted stationary bike, and literally nothing else. Not a single footprint, no weird entry points, nothing. But even so, logic just couldn't shake that creeping, heavy unease that was starting to settle over the entire house. Okay, so now we move to November 6th. James and Nora are up late watching TV, rain is just pounding against the windows outside, and then they hear it. The completely unmistakable sound of heavy, deliberate movement coming straight from the ceiling. A slow, agonizingly heavy dragging shuffle navigating across the plywood boards right over the hallway. And it slowly moves, inch by inch, until it stops directly above the living room, right above their heads. Now, this is exactly the moment where the story crosses the line from just a creepy vibe to a terrifying physical impossibility. James jumps up, instantly pulls down the hallway ladder, and climbs straight up into a totally empty, completely undisturbed attic. Everything is exactly where he left it. But the single pull chain light bulb hanging from the rafters, it is physically warm to the touch. Something had literally just been up there in the light, and it reached up and clicked it off the very second it heard him coming. Now, James is an engineer, right? So his immediate response isn't to just panic and run, it's to gather hard data. He secretly orders a continuous recording motion-activated security camera and installs it deep in the darkest corner of that attic. For 4 straight nights, absolutely nothing, pure silence. But on the 5th night, November 15th, at exactly 2:51 a.m., his phone violently vibrates on the nightstand with a motion alert. What James actually saw on that live feed completely defies any rational, natural explanation. The green night vision lit up this shape tucked into the darkest corner. It looked humanoid, but just wrong. The shoulders were violently pulled inward, the head was slightly too large for its body, and the limbs were unnaturally long and spindly. And worst of all, it was positioned directly above Elliot's bedroom. It wasn't pacing around or rummaging through boxes. It was just crouching there, completely motionless. James is just lying there watching this feed, utterly paralyzed, for 9 excruciating minutes. And then, the entity finally moved. It didn't look up at the camera. It just slowly, deliberately turned its head sideways, pressing its ear tight against the floorboards. It was flattening itself against the raw wood, actively listening to the 7-year-old boy sleeping right below it. Nora didn't even speak. She simply got out of bed, walked straight into her son's room, scooped him up, and locked the 3 of them inside the master bedroom. The very next morning, when the sun was finally up, James went right back into that attic. He made a beeline for the far corner, the exact spot where that long-limbed creature had been crouching on the video. He wasn't looking to find the entity itself, obviously. He was hunting for physical evidence that it had been there. And let me tell you, what he actually found was infinitely more disturbing than just a stray footprint in the dust. He found these deep indentations pressed hard into the edge of the old, degraded plywood flooring. But these were absolutely not human fingerprints. There were 4 parallel, slightly curved gouges, no thumbprint, just 4 long fingers gripping the edge of the board, heavily pressing down from the inside. But the spacing between these finger marks, it was impossibly wide, way too wide to belong to any normal human hand. And right next to those terrifying wide claw marks was this 3-foot circular patch on the plywood. It wasn't scratched up or violently damaged, no. It was worn perfectly smooth. It was actually polished from friction, which brilliantly and horrifyingly illustrates the true scale of this nightmare. You see, this entity hadn't just snuck in when the Callaways arrived. It had been crouching in that exact same spot, wearing those exact smooth grooves into the wood for years. Totally desperate for any logical answer, Nora reached out to Dr. Raymond Voss. He's a professor of anomalous phenomena over at Portland State University, and he's exactly the kind of guy who approaches impossible situations with this grim, analytical composure. He actually came over and spent 3 solid hours up in the Birchwood Lane attic. He carefully studied the smoothed out wood, those widely spaced finger marks, and he just watched that 2:51 a.m. footage over and over again. When Dr. Voss finally climbed down and sat at the kitchen table with the terrified parents, he asked them about the home's previous owner. It turns out an 81-year-old man named Gerald Fitch had passed away the year prior, and he had lived in that house entirely by himself for 19 years. Think about that for a second. 19 whole years of living a quiet, solitary life on the ground floor while this nameless, long-armed thing just crouched silently in the pitch black, literally inches above his head.
The explanation Dr. Voss gave them is honestly the most chilling takeaway from this entire explainer. He identified a very specific pattern in these rare types of phenomena. He explained that this entity is uniquely drawn to human presence. It acts almost like a parasite. So when its human anchor dies or moves away, it doesn't leave the house, not at all. It simply stays in the space it knows. It just waited up there in the dark for an entire year, until little Elliot walked through the front door. Dr. Voss was incredibly blunt with them. He advised them to never ever let their child sleep beneath an attic again, and to pack up and get out immediately. But, real life logistics are stubborn. They decided they just needed to stay one final night while they locked down a hotel room. Elliot was sleeping safely squeezed between them in the locked master bedroom, and then, at exactly 3:19 a.m. on November 22nd, James's phone buzzed with emotion alert one last time. What played out on the live feed next is straight up nightmare fuel. For the very first time on camera, the figure wasn't just crouching in the corner. It stood fully upright. Its head was painfully bent at an angle against the low rafters. It started taking these incredibly slow, deliberate steps right toward the center of the attic. It stopped dead over the hallway hatch. It slowly crouched back down. And then, through the live camera audio, James could clearly hear the pull-down hatch creak. On the screen, the door visibly nudged down just a fraction of an inch. The entity was gently pushing from the other side, testing the latch to see if the family was awake. James and Nora didn't hesitate for even a second. They grabbed Elliot, bolted straight out the front door into the freezing Portland rain, and locked themselves inside their car until the sun finally came up. They never slept another second in that house. Now, James did have to return briefly in January, right in the middle of broad daylight, to collect some important documents. He obviously didn't dare open the attic, but looking up at the closed hatch from the hallway, he noticed something new. 4 impossibly wide, parallel indentations freshly pressed deep into the wooden lip of the door. This whole terrifying ordeal perfectly embodies the chilling point Dr. Voss made in his final lecture before retiring. He noted that the true core horror of these encounters isn't necessarily the physical reality of the entities themselves. It's their boundless, agonizing patience. It's the willingness to crouch in the pitch black, suffocating dust of a hot attic for literally decades, never making a single sound, just waiting for you to eventually be the one to open the door. Fast forward to today, and Elliot is 10 years old, but the deep psychological scars of his friend from the attic are absolutely still there. He completely refuses to talk about the house on Birchwood Lane. He absolutely insists on sleeping with his bedroom door wide open, and under zero circumstances will he ever sleep in a bedroom that has an attic space above it. Because he knows, way better than any of us, that empty spaces in a house are very rarely truly empty. But honestly, here is the absolute most disturbing takeaway from this entire overview. The Callaways fled, and the house at 1408 Birchwood Lane was immediately put right back on the market. And it successfully sold to new, unsuspecting owners in March of 2022. Which means, whatever it was that crouched in that dusty corner for 19 years, whatever left those 4 impossibly wide, thumbless marks gouged into the wood, it never left. It's still up there, right now, just waiting in the dark. So the next time you hear your house settling at night or hear the wood groaning in the ceiling right above your bed, maybe ask yourself if you're really alone in there. If you found this explainer of the Birchwood Lane Watcher as completely fascinating and terrifying as I did, definitely make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into documented nightmares. Stay safe out there, and seriously, always check your attic.